Hello, welcome to Frequencies. Tuning into frequencies of human behavior, perspective, and empathy. I'm Matt, and on this episode, we're going to talk about humans. I mean, judging by my little intro there, you probably figured that out, human behavior, perspective, and empathy. But today we're going to talk about humans, or more specifically, possibly the vessel that we are. Or maybe the vessel we could be. I want to talk about the brain, consciousness, to be more specific. So, do you think the brain is the source of our thoughts? You know, the source of everything we know? You know, is each of us just our brain driving the ship? Or is it something else? Is it the other way around? You know, what if our bodies, our brains included, are actually just vessels? You know, something being driven by something else. Something we call consciousness. That's what we're going to get into today. Consciousness. You know, and anybody who knows anything about consciousness knows it's an extremely complex topic. I'll be the first to admit I don't know too much about it. You know, and it's really bigger than any of us fully understand. I'm still new to it myself. I've circled around it for years, dabbling with different topics and stuff without really realizing what I was even looking at. But recently I really started to lean in. And if I go back to the original question, I think I'm more of an option B guy. I do, and it's as of fairly recently. I don't think the brain is the source. I think it's more like a receiver, an antenna, and tuning into something much bigger, some kind of field, or it's tuning into something in the field, some kind of signal, something we don't really fully understand yet. And there's a lot of theories about this. And one thing you'll find pretty quickly is nobody can really fully agree on any of them. There's a lot of similarities between a lot of the theories, but really nobody can 100% fully agree on any of them. I mean, we're talking about how our world operates. So it's a pretty complex topic. One of my favorite podcasts I started listening to fairly recently asked every guest the same question: what is consciousness? And every single person answers it differently. These are extremely intelligent people, researchers, scholars, rocket scientists, I believe. You know, people way, way smarter than me. And they definitely cannot pin it down. That alone should tell you something. We don't really know what it is. But something that really pulled me deeper into this whole world was the Telepathy Tapes podcast. That was the moment where I kind of stopped and went, all right, hold on. What is this? If you've never listened to the Telepathy Tapes, you should definitely check them out. Excellent podcast. But the podcast really opens the door to the idea that there might be more going on here than just what we can see, what we can touch, and what we can measure. And yeah, I know it sounds out there. Totally. It sounds wacky. Sounds wild, and some of you might already be rolling your eyes and might be thinking, all right, I'm out of here. This is where I check out. This is total bullshit. But you know, they're real stories, real people, real experiences. The Telepathy Tapes, especially like going back to season 1, comes at this from a completely different angle through experiences of primarily nonverbal autistic kids and adults and people around them. It's grounded, it's human, and whether you fully believe it or not, it makes you think. And it's not even a podcast about consciousness. It just dabbles in it, and they speak about something else happening. But it's a great starting spot to kind of get to know a little bit more. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not claiming I have any answers. I really don't. But I've had enough moments and enough experiences and enough things I've seen and felt that make me believe that there's really more to this than just us walking around on our 2 feet, going to work, coming home, in these physical bodies just playing the game of life. There's something deeper, definitely, and it's something much bigger. And in this episode, I just want to explore that a little. Share what I've been learning, what I've been questioning, and what's been pulling me further into this whole idea of consciousness. Think of this as a starting point, a scratch and sniff episode, if you will. Just enough to give you a sense of it and maybe pull you in a little bit deeper too. Because if we all wake up a little bit and realize there's a little bit more to life than just waking up, going to work, and trying to make enough money to get a big house and a big car, you realize there's a little bit more to life than just that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Consciousness. Let's tune in. So, yeah, this episode is about consciousness. And just to set expectations right up front, I'm a total newbie to this world. And this is obviously an extremely complex topic. And the terms for it, you can go deeper and deeper into the wormhole about all of the things I'll be discussing today. And I'm not that smart. So, there's so many different angles to this, so many different interpretations, different ways people try to explain what consciousness actually is. Some people believe consciousness comes from the brain, that it's a byproduct of our biology. Others believe the opposite, that consciousness is the thing driving the body, that our brains aren't really piloting the ship. But the ship is being piloted by something else. And that's the side I lean toward. Now, I think a lot of people get turned off by this topic pretty quickly. It gets labeled as woo-woo, and once that label sticks, people stop listening before they really even give it a shot. And I get that. I was hesitant too. Not because I thought it was nonsense. I just hadn't experienced anything that made me take it too seriously yet. I've always been someone who needs to see things and feel things and connect the dots in my own life before I really lean in. But once I started hearing certain ideas, certain stories, things about this shared field, this collective layer of reality, whatever you want to call it, it started lining up with experiences I had already had. Things I couldn't really explain before suddenly had a place to land in a way. And that's what pulled me in deeper. So again, I'm not coming at this as an expert, not even close. I'm coming at this as just a regular guy from Missouri trying to make sense of something that feels a lot bigger than me. And maybe hearing it from that perspective helps it click a little different for you too. So let me go back to the question at the beginning. What is consciousness? It's a great question. And go ahead and pause it right here for a second. Pause the show right here and think about this question on your own and come up with your own answer before I continue. What do you think consciousness is? Dying to hear what you said, because if you ask 10 different experts, you'll probably get 10 completely different explanations. There's a podcast, I mentioned it earlier, but it's a podcast from the Monroe Institute called Expanding on Consciousness. And the host asks every guest that exact question. Brilliant people, all with different answers, every single one of them. But I want to share mine. And of course, I'm going to explain mine using a metaphor or using a little personification. I've done a lot of thinking as far as how I would try to tell somebody who doesn't know anything about consciousness how to describe it. And I've come up with this scenario, if you will. And so imagine a painter in a studio. They've got everything they need. The brushes, the paint, the canvas, the lighting, the space, everything is set up around them. Jars full of different paint and all that good stuff. Now, in this metaphor, consciousness is the painter. But not just the painter. I should elaborate a little bit more because it's everything. It's the painter, it's the brushes, it's the paint, it's the canvas, it's the lighting, it's everything in that environment that has given that painter what he needs to paint. Imagine jars around him that are all of his experiences up to this point. The entire environment that makes the painting possible. It's everything. So what are we? Well, we're the painting, if you will. Kind of imagine the movie What Dreams May Come. You know how when Robin Williams is in his heaven, if you will, the painting is moving, and kind of imagine that type of world. That's how I see this metaphor. It's constantly moving, and the painter is always painting it and changing it. But every moment, the painter is using all of his tools, all of its past experience, all of its inputs, everything it has access to create the next stroke. And that becomes what we see, what we experience, what we call reality. Our brain? I don't think it's the creator. I think it's more like the antenna for the display, the projector. It takes whatever's being painted and renders it into something we can see, feel, and interpret in real time and interact with, obviously. Is it what's moving my fingers? Well, technically, yes, but our consciousness is telling the brain to move our fingers. Our consciousness is telling our brain to wake up and go to work because our consciousness is driving the ship. So the thoughts you have, the world you see, the experiences you go through, that's the painting unfolding. And consciousness is the thing creating it. We're not holding the brush. We're watching the canvas. That's the best way I can describe it, at least for now. I'm sure I could elaborate that metaphor for hours or days, but I think it's a pretty cool visual way to perceive it. So what actually pulled me into all of this? What made me stop and really pay attention? And like I mentioned earlier, for me, it was the telepathy tapes. And what makes that show so interesting is where it starts. It's not coming at consciousness from some abstract philosophical angle. It's grounded in real people. And a lot of the focus is on non-speaking autistic individuals, many of them kids, working closely with their parents and caregivers. And so you've got multiple people involved, multiple perspectives, real life situations. And that part kind of hit close to me. I have a nephew who's a non-speaking autistic, and I don't get to spend as much time as him as I'd like, just because I don't necessarily live the closest to him in life, of course. But every interaction I've had with him, it's so cool. I mean, I think it's super cool observing him and watching him and trying to engage with him in any way I possibly can. But at one point, I tried to start a project around him, for him, and I wanted to find a way to help him, communicate to my brother and his wife using music. And it was a project I called Spectrum Sound. I guess by this time I had already pretty much recognized that I probably had ADHD, but I wasn't really thinking much about my possible autism diagnosis. This was not even close. I just saw something there, and I wanted to help my brother and his wife communicate with their son, my nephew. So when I found this podcast, it landed a little differently, because what they explore isn't just communication in the traditional sense. They start getting into telepathy, nonverbal communication that goes beyond gestures, beyond devices, into something much harder to explain. Kids communicating with their parents without speaking, sharing thoughts, images, needs. And yeah, on the surface, it sounds pretty wild. It sounds pretty wild and crazy, but these are real families, real stories. And whether you fully buy into it or not, it makes you pause. It really does. It makes you think. Because even if a fraction of these things are true, it points to something much bigger going on. Telepathy, communicating with somebody just through their mind. That's not necessarily, it sounds like sci-fi. It sounds like magic. But outside of the non-speaking autistic kids, they also touch on other areas like people with Alzheimer's or dementia, where traditional communication is breaking down. But some form of connection still seems to exist, not through words, but through something else. Call it telepathy, call it nonverbal connection, call it something we don't have a language for yet. But it all circles back to this idea that consciousness might not be limited to just the brain, that there's something shared, there's something external, there's something, we're in something larger, a field, something we're all tapping into. Now, I don't want to spend this whole episode just breaking down the telepathy tapes. That's not what we're here for. I just wanted to bring it up because that was the spark for me. But there's one episode in particular that really locked me in. It was from season 2, and it was about creativity. And this one hit hard for me because I'm a pretty creative person. I'm a music guy. I love all things creative. This episode was super cool. I mean, they brought in some big names like Rick Rubin, the legendary producer who's worked across basically every genre you can think of. And something that's interesting about him is he's not a musician. He's not a musician at all. He's a listener. He's a feel guy, someone who knows just when something is right. Super cool guy. But the way he talks about creativity lines up perfectly with this idea of consciousness as a field, if you will. Now, the idea is creativity doesn't come from us. The idea, we don't necessarily come up with the idea. The ideas exist in this field that we're in, that we're among. I'm doing this like it's this gas, but that's not what I mean. I mean, it's around us. We're in it. They're in this collective field of everything, data, and the ideas are more or less received or given to us, or we're gathering that data out from the collective consciousness, if you will. This field that we're in, it comes through us. We receive it through our antenna, through our brain, if you want. I mean, that's, like I mentioned earlier, our brain is more like the antenna, but we don't come up with the idea. The ideas already exist somewhere, and we're just the ones that catch them. And I know that's going to sound ridiculous to some people, but if you've ever written music or created anything, honestly, you've probably felt this at some point or another. That moment where something just drops in. It's just boom. It just comes. Something comes to you. Being a songwriter, there's been times where the song just writes itself. It's amazing when it happens. You'll hear artists say this all the time. I've heard Paul Simon talk about it. Rick Rubin talks about it on that episode, and a lot of musicians do. And I can say the same thing from my own experience. There are moments where it feels like you're not really building something. It feels like you're receiving it. Like you just tuned into the right frequency at the right time. And that lines up perfectly with this idea I mentioned earlier, that consciousness is this field and the brain is the antenna. And then maybe the ideas aren't really created in the brain, but they're more so found, or maybe they find us. And at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, yeah, right, get out of here, total bullshit, dude. And I understand, I can see that, but I've had this happen multiple times. Not all the time, obviously. Trust me, I wish it did. That's kind of the dream as a songwriter, if I had musical ideas just coming to me left and right, I'd be writing songs one after another, but that just doesn't happen. But there have been very specific moments where it didn't feel like I was creating something. I felt like I was catching it. And there's a pattern I've noticed every single time. When it happens, I'm in an extremely good mental headspace. Extremely good, meaning I don't have a lot of stress in my life. I'm almost entirely dedicated to it. Don't get me wrong, sometimes when you are stressed, that thing comes to you. But most of the time, at least for me, when I don't have those distractions, that fear, that stress, and I am 100% locked in to writing something, it flows. And it flows nice. I will not lie. So I'll give you a couple examples. The first one is this song I wrote called You Do. And this goes back to probably, 2015, 2017. I'm not sure. I was still working at the company I worked for 17 years. And I was on a work trip with a few guys. It was a 2-week-long work trip, 2 different jobs back to back. And I was just exhausted. And it was like day 9 or 10. And we're all standing around after a long, 16, 17-hour day, maybe even longer. I don't really know. We were dead tired. And one of my buddies, Eric, we're standing around, and he's like, man, my feet hurt. They're just killing me. I got to go into town. I got to get some foot cream because these things are just killing me. I don't know what to do. I can't find nothing. The salesman for the job was on the trip with us. Tim is an amazing guy. And he says, hey, I got some back at the hotel room. And Eric just pauses and looks around, and with everything he has says, oh, you do? And it's just like that, the eyes and everything. Just, oh, you do? And it was he put everything he had to it. Just relief, disbelief, gratitude, pain, all in 2 words. And we all just lost it. It was so funny. That moment kind of, we talked about it that night and the next day, but eventually those moments, they pass and it turns into just a funny memory. A couple of weeks later, I wake up to a bunch of voice messages from 2 of my coworkers. One that was on the trip and another one that was in our department that heard all about it, of course. And they had been drinking the night, and this is back when I drank as well. And they decided to reenact that moment, the whole thing. Doing the voices of Tim and Eric, and fully committed. They were all in, and they sent me 10 different takes, and I was dying. I was dying out laughing. I'm pretty sure they sent them to me because I did tell them, dude, I've got to write a song about that. It's gonna be hilarious. And I never really did, but when they sent me those, I was just like, holy crap, I've got to do something with this now. Pretty confident. I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next morning, and I had it in my head. I remember hearing, you do, you do. I had it in my head, and I was determined. I went and got my guitar. I went and found a quiet place. I had 2, I'm pretty sure my second child was a baby at the time, but I went and found some quiet space, and I was like, I've got to go write this. And I wrote that song in a day. I shouldn't say I wrote that song in a day because I don't even remember writing it. It was that quick. It was writing itself. The attachment it has to the moment is perfect. After I wrote it, I wrote it that weekend, recorded it, played it for the guys. They were shocked because it captured the moment so good. I actually used the recording of the reenactment in the song. The guys lost it. I can't tell you how, at some point maybe I'll publish it. This song is not published, but it was so good. He said, you do. I know you sound a little too grateful for the spit of shoe powder and fabulous foot cream that you have given me. Obviously you need a melody behind it, but it is dead on hilarious. The guys absolutely loved it. But sadly, that salesman actually passed away last year, 2025, unexpectedly. So now that song even has even more meaning to it, and holds that moment like no other. pretty bittersweet. But I will say straight up, I didn't write that song. That song showed up. Another example, more recent, and this one I wrote at the beginning of 2025, or these couple. So at the beginning of 2025, I made a decision to abandon my career. And I walked away from my career and went all in with my music. You know, it's funny because the day I put in my 2 weeks, the day I was going to put in my 2 weeks, my dad calls me and he says, he's got a couch he wanted to give away. I said, sure, bring it by. And he brings it by. And while he's delivering it, and I'm telling him I'm about ready to quit my job. And he's like, well, let's go out to eat because I want to talk to you about an opportunity. He gives me this job. I mean, you couldn't have painted this picture any more perfect, because he needed me to work for him. I told him what I was doing, how I wanted to write some music, and he was like, well, I'll be flexible. And I mean, it was a perfect opportunity. I was only working a couple days a week, and the rest of my time I decided I'm going to write and record this album. So mentally, I was all in. No split focus. No, maybe someday, not just on the weekends. I mean, I was all in. And that matters because when you're fully aligned with what you want to be doing, something opens up. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, it gives you access to locked in capabilities. I can't say it any other way other than when you jump off that cliff, you've got to start flying, and you do start flying. Your wings start flapping, and you get these things start matching up to what you wanted to do. You know, we spend so much of our lives distracted, stressed, pulled from different directions with work and our families. But when all that quiets down and your attention is locked in, you get access to something different. You really do. And during that stretch, I wrote and recorded 7 songs, the 7-song EP, and I did it in about 3 months. 2 of those songs were pretty much written in a day, a day each. One of the songs, Enchanted River, one being The Mountaineer, 2 of, I think, one of my most well-written songs I've ever written, and 2 of the best songs on that EP, in my opinion. But Enchanted River, I mean, if you listen to it, it flows. And the chord progression isn't just a simple 2-3 chord progression. They're fairly complex. Lots of different chords, lots of movement. The lyrics are pretty complex. It's not just a 3-word hook. It's a pretty complex song. But writing it, there wasn't any overthinking. I didn't have to rewrite it 10 times. It just wrote itself. It was almost scary. The other song, The Mountaineer, that one's a story that was written on a snowy day, and I kind of was using the snowy day energy to kind of capture this moment of it's like an old Western type environment where this cowboy is with his posse, and he breaks away from the posse. They're going out west, to start their life, to start a new life, and the mountaineer breaks away from his posse, who is, they're raiding homes and stealing, and they're not the nicest people. But he says, I'm not doing that. And he breaks away, and he goes over the mountain through Native American territory, the harder path to get to the same place. Getting lost in what the song is about. It's essentially kind of about breaking away, doing your own thing, and doing things on your own terms. And essentially, I was thinking about breaking away from like a corporate job, but I'm getting lost in it. The point is, the song wrote itself. It showed up. I didn't write it. It came to me, and I was just the pen and paper. And when this happens, it's so hard to explain. If you've never experienced it, you probably have, and you don't even realize it. But if you've played music and have experienced it, it's pretty amazing stuff. When you're playing the guitar, your hand will just move to another chord, and it's the chord you want. And you do it again, and it's the chord you want. Whatever the tone that comes out of your mouth is the right tone. I mean, it's magical, and I can't explain it. It feels less like building and more like uncovering. And that's why this idea of consciousness as a field hits so hard for me. Because in those moments, it really doesn't feel like the ideas are coming from me. It feels like I'm just tuned into something. And for whatever reason, I catch it. It's awesome. Now, does the fact that I wrote those songs in a matter of 24 hours prove we're living in a simulation? No, absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. But it did open my eyes. Before I move on, I do want to circle back to the telepathy tapes for just a minute longer, because that podcast was a big part of what pushed me deeper into this whole world, like I said. And to be clear, the telepathy tapes isn't a podcast about consciousness. And I think I mentioned that earlier, but that's not really how it's presented. What it does, it does talk about non-speaking autistic children and people, but that alone isn't enough to make you pay attention. They also touch on things like savant syndrome, which is a fascinating subject in its own right. You'll hear stories of people who, after major head injuries or some other profound neurological event, they'll suddenly develop extraordinary abilities, things they've never explained, things they've never studied. They can learn, they'll know several languages without doing any type of, reading about those languages. People they become musical savants and can play genius level musicianship. Unbelievable. It's almost scary when this happens. But it's like they receive downloads of the entire manuscript, the entire playbook, the entire freaking manual. It's crazy. And they also spend time on some near-death experiences, which is another huge topic, because if someone comes close to death and comes back with a completely changed understanding of reality, that tends to make people stop and think. And it raises questions about what else might be beyond what we can see right in front of us. Like I said, that's what this podcast did for me, but it wasn't just the subject matter. It was the timing. So around the same time I was listening to it, and I was also beginning to notice things about me, things that I had overlooked for most of my life. I was learning more about autism, obviously, and especially high-functioning autism, and I started recognizing patterns in my own experiences. And that led me to a strong personal realization. I was like, man, maybe I might be on the spectrum myself. And I don't have an official diagnosis, but the more I reflected, the more things started to click in place. And I remember the morning clearly, and I think I had just finished an episode, and I started really going back into some of my old memories, really processing some old childhood memories, teenage years, and different situations I had lived through. And I'm sitting in my living room, and I was just thinking so hard. I was deep into thought, and then it hit me instantly. There was a moment where I was just like, ding, 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 ding. And I just lost it. I started crying because in that moment, I thought, my God, I think I have it. I think I might be on the spectrum. It wasn't a slow discovery for me. It wasn't like over months or weeks or years. There was a day or two, but then that morning, it was bam. Like, I really was convinced that it had happened. In that moment, I was processing a lot of these major events that had happened in my life, and I was like, oh, is that why that happened? Oh, is that why that happened? That's probably why that happened. Holy crap. I eventually called my mom, asked her a few questions. I texted my brother, whose son is non-speaking autistic, and I was just trying to make sense of everything that hit me. It was wild, but a little bit later in that same morning, something happened that felt almost too perfect. I could actually look up the day because I still have the text on my phone, but I got a text message from an old coworker. David was his name. And David had autism. David and I had worked together for a few years, and he was always incredibly kind to me. He worked at the place that I worked at for 17, 18 years. He worked there for the last 2 years that I was there. And a lot of people didn't really know how to connect with him, but I always just really treated him like a friend. Check in on him, talk, see how he was doing every day, and over time he had told me he actually loved me a few times. You know, it was genuine. It really was. And he was just a really loving guy. I genuinely believed he cared for me and I cared for him. And he really just had a simple habit of reminding me that he cared. But on that morning, right after I made that connection, it was about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. I get up really early and I get a text from David. While working with David, I did give him my number because he was a big sports guy. I'm a hockey guy. I like to play roller hockey, a little outdoor rink near me, and he lives near me. So I gave him my number a couple of years before, just in case he ever wanted to go play hockey with me or something. I don't play hockey much, but I thought, you know what, maybe I'll invite him sometime. So I had his number, he had my number. This was about 2 years after I quit working for that place. And it's the morning that I make this connection, and out of nowhere, David texts me. And it was just a simple, hey man, I hope you're doing all right, buddy. I miss you. That was it. And it hit me hard. I mean, I about dropped my phone when I read it, just considering what I had experienced that morning. I honestly felt like it was a little confirmation from the universe. Like the timing itself was just saying, yeah, there's something going on here. You know, it was wild. That's partly why the telepathy tapes kind of hits true it holds such a heavy part of this story for me, because it wasn't just an interesting podcast. I mean, it's a fantastic podcast. Check it out. But it was one of the things that helped me start seeing myself a little bit differently. And once I started looking into consciousness more seriously, I eventually found Robert Monroe and Monroe Institute. Monroe is really one of the most well-known names in the whole space, and for good reason. You know, his work around altered states of consciousness and out-of-body experiences and binaural beats, and they're fascinating, for sure. He and his team helped pioneer techniques that people still use today to access different states of consciousness, of awareness. I spoke briefly about it in the magic of music and frequencies, and I still don't feel comfortable enough really diving into his story, just because there is a lot of complex words, and it's a very complex story of what he's gone through, his backstory, what he went on to develop with the Monroe Institute. But one of his right-hand men was Tom Campbell, who was another extremely intelligent man, of course. I think he was another rocket scientist of some kind, but he's another giant voice in that world. And his theory of everything, it's called this big toe theory, the framework. And with that theory, he goes really in depth into how our reality is much like a simulation. And throughout explaining his theory of everything, he consistently refers to the World of Warcraft and the video game of the World of Warcraft, using the avatar in the game, the player in the game, and there's somebody playing the game. And he uses that metaphor consistently while explaining it. And for me, he uses it almost too much, just because some people will kind of take it and think that that's exactly what he means, although that's not what he means. He's using it as a metaphor to describe something. So I totally get why he does it. And I think his theory is it's pretty much the same thing I'm saying, but the way he describes it using the World of Warcraft is efficient. But it's a cool way, definitely a cool way to describe it. But whether you agree with it or not, it makes you think. And that's why I wanted to mention Monroe and Campbell here, because they're part of the larger path that this led me down. And if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, the Monroe Institute is still active today. You can actually go there. They offer programs that you can go there for a week and stay, and they offer a ton of different programs that give you the ability to achieve these alternate states of consciousness, deep meditation. And I mean, I would, if I had the time and funds and resources to go, I would do it in a heartbeat. I think it's somewhere in Virginia. The campus is apparently extremely beautiful. So cool. I would love to do it. I just wanted to touch on them just because if you really want to learn about consciousness, go down that road. Listen to them. Read up on Robert Monroe and Tom Campbell and Robert Monroe's ideas about loosh farming, about how the aliens, I say aliens in quotes because that's technically what they are, but when people hear aliens, they kind of kind of get discredited for some reason, but he went out of body hundreds of times to talk to these aliens, and he learned that these aliens were basically farming us for loosh, just like in Monsters, Inc. Our energy, loosh is our energy. It's like our sadness and our happiness. I don't have the full knowledge of how to describe it, but you should go look into it yourself, because it's a fantastic theory. It's a fantastic story. Look into Robert Monroe, the Monroe Institute. Look into the telepathy tapes. Once again, they kind of got the door open for me, and they may do the same for you. It led me into the questions about consciousness and autism and communication and altered states and what it might mean to be a human in a much bigger way than I had ever considered before. So what's the point of all this? I'm not a consciousness expert, obviously, and I'm not here to pretend I've cracked some grand theory about how the world works, but all I'm really trying to do is share a starting point. Like I said, this is a scratch and sniff episode. Something meant to just pique your interest and maybe get you to look a little deeper on your own. Because once I started entertaining the idea that consciousness might be a bigger part of this whole experience than I had ever realized, it changed the way I saw things, in a good way. It simplified a lot for me. Not in a way that made life smaller, but in a way that made it feel more meaningful. There was a time not too long ago when I was still chasing all the things we're told to chase. The bigger house, the nicer car, the picture-perfect life. And I get it. I understand that drive. But somewhere along the way, I started realizing that none of that really mattered, as much as I thought it did, at least. My house is fine. My car is fine. What I really want is to do something I love, to make something beautiful, to create things I'm proud of, to help people, to make people smile, to build something honest and loving and real. That, to me, is a much better pursuit. Because when you start looking at life through the lens of consciousness, it becomes a little harder to care so much about all the noise. It becomes more about authenticity, more about love, more about how you treat people, more about whether you're living in a way that lines up with who you really are. And honestly, when you have nothing to hide, that's a powerful place to be. When you're authentic to your core, when you're not carrying around any secrets and pretending to be somebody else, there's a big sense of freedom in that. And I think that's the real win. So if this episode did anything for you, I hope it just nudged you a little bit. And I hope it made you curious. I hope it made you want to learn more, ask better questions, more questions, and maybe look at your own life a little bit differently. Because who wouldn't want to learn about how all of this works? That's all I got for today. I appreciate you listening. If anything you heard today resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it, comment, like it, just pass it around to somebody who might need it. Until next time, take care of yourself. Be good to people and keep asking questions. Later.